Hello, I'm Will Hanrahan and I'm the creative director of FirstLook. In this podcast series, we're inviting you to listen to stories that we have told as part of our various TV series over 15 years or so. And in each episode, you will hear the behind-the-scenes, largely unedited interviews that we've conducted over more than a decade then of making true crime programming. Today, we'll be hearing from Martin and Claire McGrath. It's their daughter Keely, who was murdered by her partner and the father of her children just before Christmas in 2018.
She was always looking for love.
She was definitely vulnerable, but she wouldn't listen.
We had no concerns at that time about any views. So you ask yourself, why couldn't she tell us?
That were his words. This isn't going to end well.
He'd already murdered her.
The day that she died was the day my life stopped.
When we spoke to Martin and Claire, they were still clearly in shock. They very bravely agreed to talk to us. They wanted to talk to us, actually. And during their interview, they'll tell you in their own words why. Martin and Claire had two daughters. Keely was the oldest. We spoke to them in their family home.
Speed on motor cameras.
Okay.
So just, what was life like when Keely was little?
Well, I was in the army, and so we moved around quite a lot from when the girls were born to from a very early age. So we spent a couple of years in Germany, then back to England, then back to Germany again. So they were used to moving around, used to moving schools.
It was always hard work trying to look after them both. I was so young, I was only in my early 20s. Being away from home, being in a different country, I didn't have anybody in the army, I didn't know anything about army life. It was quite difficult. A lot of military wives were very young, they had young children. So you became a family. The guys were away, doing whatever they were doing on exercise, and we just became quite close as a family. So you made a lot of friends that way.
Keely and Alex were two very different personalities. Keely was quite independent, feisty, quite willing to do things on her own. Alex was much quieter, much more of a sort of homely girl, whereas Keely was more independent and liked to get out and do things on her own. And that was the case throughout their childhoods, really, even to the point where, Keely, as soon as she left school, she wanted to go out and work, didn't get on very well with school, didn't like authority very much, and so was keen to leave school and make her own way as soon as she could, and she did exactly that. She left school at 16 and started working straight away. And she enjoyed work, and she'd get up early, go to work, she didn't miss her days, and I think it just fitted in more with independence, which, as I said, she showed from an early age.
And what sort of a little girl was Keely? What did she like doing? What did she have hobbies or?
She was a bit of a tomboy. She liked playing with, she had a garage that she liked playing with. She'd always get her garage out when she came home from play school. Played outside a lot.
Was she a sociable person?
She had a good circle of friends. We lived, again, being in the army, we lived around an army base where all of her friends' parents, or fathers mainly, but in a couple of cases, mothers, were in the army. So they all shared a sort of common background to a point where their at least one of their parents all did pretty much the same thing, and we lived close. They could all walk to each other's houses, and they used to meet up in a way that I guess teenagers did. But yeah, she had a good circle of friends. We'd often have barbecues and sort of house parties that the families would get involved in, so they both grew up in quite a social environment, yeah.
Just an inch back on your chair, please.
The upbringing that Martin and Claire described, that's pretty typical of military families. They move around a lot. The girls do actually get a lot of advantages from living on a military base. In 2004, when Keely's 16, she leaves school and she's able to begin work.
She didn't get on well. She went to college for about a day and a half. Didn't like that either. Managed to get a job where we lived in the local army camp. There was an officer's mess. So she got a job doing waitressing there, and she got up every morning at like 3:30 in the morning to go to work at 6:30 to put her makeup on before she went to work. She always had to have her makeup on, so she'd get up really early and go to work, and that was what she needed to do. She loved work. That was what she was born to do, to go to work, not to go to school.
So you said about her putting her makeup on. Describe the way that she looked.
She She didn't need makeup for a start. She was beautiful without it. She didn't think that. She had no confidence, no self-esteem, so she wore a mask basically. She'd always have thick foundation on, probably about 10 bottles of mascara going at any one time. She'd spend hours just putting makeup on, and that was Keely. Whatever she did, she was covered in makeup. I couldn't say what colour her hair would be when she used to come and see us. Sometimes it was red, sometimes it was brown, sometimes it was blonde, whatever colour. She didn't see what everyone else could see. You know, she had wonderful friends who even now will tell me that she was so funny, was so there for them. She was really generous. She would buy them anything, do anything for them, but she didn't see that she was like that.
Although Keely was happier in work than at school, she does show signs of low self-esteem. That's what our producer Claire Thomas was picking up.
It's really sad, isn't it, looking at your perfect child and seeing that they don't value themselves.
Yeah.
We wonder whether we thought that she felt neglected throughout a lot of her life. I'm not sure if you're aware that I'm not her natural father. But Claire and I got together when Keely was 3 months old. You know, right from her earliest memories, certainly, I'd been her dad. So she had a sense of neglect, we think, from her natural father, who left the scene whilst Claire was pregnant. I mean, jumping ahead a few years, the girls went to boarding school, which, in hindsight, we wonder whether she looked upon as us rejecting her. And then, you know, she had these relationships. The first 2 relationships, we are aware there's some physical and mental abuse involved in those, and then obviously ultimately the third one, which at this point we weren't aware of. So she was, we got the impression that she was always looking for love, not just in relationships with sort of partners, but perhaps from us as well. As far as we were concerned, we were giving them that love, but again, Claire and I reflected, in the years since she's died, did we do enough to assure her that love was there? I don't know. Maybe we did, or maybe we didn't.
Do you think that's the domain of all parents?
Perhaps, but I guess you reflect on it more when you know they're not here anymore. You ask yourself, did she get involved in these relationships, or was there anything we did or didn't do? Why did she end up in more than one abusive relationship? One might be unlucky, 2 might, but we now know it's a trait in a lot of victims. That I don't think it's fully understood why, but it's fairly common that. I mean, men as well, but mainly women. If they've been involved in one abusive relationship, they're very often involved in more than one. And we ask ourselves, is it something we did or didn't do?
Tried to get her help. She had somebody come to talk to her. She's just starting to get more comfortable and talk to them, and they left the job they were doing. So again, she was let down. And that was her life. She was just let down by various people. She flitted through life looking for whatever it was she was looking for that she never found. She was definitely vulnerable, but she wouldn't listen. She wrote me a letter a few years ago saying she wished she'd listened to me.
Throughout what is a heartbreaking interview, you'll hear Keely's parents talk about what all parents do, and they do it all of the time. They question themselves. Am I doing it right? Am I being a good mum, a good dad? Am I doing enough? Keely went through some very difficult times as she became a young woman. While still a teenager, she fell into an abusive relationship. She moved away from parents and a sister. The family became estranged, frankly, for a short period. Her parents knew something was wrong, but they couldn't intervene. They just didn't feel they could. Keely was living in Derbyshire. It's 150 miles away from where the family were living in West Berkshire. But 3 years later, Claire hears that Keely has reached out to her mum, Keely's grandma. She's met a new partner and she's had a baby.
So I met her at my mum's, met her and the baby, and it was like no time had It's like I'd seen her all the time, and she seemed really happy then.
She seemed more content, certainly at first. She appeared to quite like being the sort of the housewife, if that's the right term, looking after the children, cooking the meals and all that sort of stuff. We used to laugh because when we first got back in touch with her again, she used to describe the meals she used to cook, which for us was quite amusing because she was never that way inclined when she was at home. So to hear that she was cooking these exotic meals was fun for us, and we laughed about it together.
The new man is Anthony. You'll hear him referred to as Tony Davis. He's 35, Keely's 27, and Tony runs a business locally in Derbyshire. It's been 3 years since Keely was regularly in touch with her mum and dad and her sister, but she seems settled as a stay-at-home mum.
He was a good provider. She seemed happy. She'd come and visit us probably once a month for the weekend. She always brought money with her. She always had cash. She's always spending it on everybody. She cooked us a meal while she was here. She'd never done that.
So she looked content. She appeared content with us, and he appeared to be successful in business, looked after her, provided for her, so we thought. So whilst it took a while for us, a couple of years before we met him, certainly for me, the image that we were given appeared to be a reasonable one.
We thought, well, she's finally settled. He's providing, she's happy, they've got their family, we can relax now.
And what she would presumably sort of curate his image for you. What would she tell you about him? How would she speak about him?
She'd say, oh, he's working really hard. He's trying to provide enough for us to build a house, because they lived in a very small house. He wanted to build a big house for them. Everything he did, he worked 24 hours a day for his family. That's what we thought he was doing, so she was happy.
We had no concerns at that time about any physical abuse or anything like that, or even mental abuse.
When was the first time that it came to your attention that there was something untoward about the relationship?
After she died.
At some point in the early hours of December 13th, Keely McGrath is killed. She'd been to visit her parents just 4 days earlier.
The last time that she came for a visit, did you notice anything different?
We knew she was quieter.
So on the Friday she arrived. She seemed really quiet, not herself. But I thought, she had 3 children, under 3.5. She's tired. She's just driven 3 hours, got 3 young children, she's tired. She took the older 2 to the pantomime on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday she said she was going home early.
Claire noticed it more than I did, and again it's one of those things that when you know subsequently what happens, is it was perhaps a bit more obvious than we considered at the time.
Having children, it's tiring. She left about 11:30 in the morning, said bye, waved, drove off. That was the last time we saw her.
It was during that weekend that Claire and Martin realised that their daughter's relationship was in trouble. Claire sees a text message from Tony to Keely accusing her of cheating. Perhaps that would explain why their daughter was so quiet.
On the Wednesday evening, he started texting Claire to say that she had been cheating on him. There'd been an argument. I think he said he was out the house. Claire's reaction was, I can't deal with this, speak to Martin. So he then texted me, and that was the first time he'd ever texted me. And to be honest, and this hurts now knowing, my text back to him was quite supportive of him, saying, we're here to help, we don't want to interfere, but we're here to help, and let us know what we can do. And I think that was the one and only text I got from him that evening. And then on the Thursday morning, I was working from home, and I sent a text to him around about just after 9 o'clock, saying, again, I don't want to interfere, I don't know exactly what's happening, but the children are the priority, make sure they're safe and looked after, and we'll deal with the rest, or words to that effect. He and I exchanged the text at about 9:10. Him saying it'll be fine. We'll work this out. Words to that effect. But he'd already murdered her.
Paramedics arrive at the house on the Thursday morning. They find Keely dead at the scene, having suffered catastrophic injuries, 48 external injuries, 14 broken ribs, 2 collapsed lungs, and a fractured skull. Police are called. Keely's story is told in an episode of My Lover, My Killer. You can watch some of it on our YouTube channel, or you can catch it in the United Kingdom and the United States on Netflix. For the documentary, we spoke to her friends and neighbours. Most of them had no idea of the violence she was living with. We also spoke to Detective Inspector Toby Fawcett Greaves. It was him who led the investigation.
On the morning of the 13th of December 2018, Derbyshire Police received a call from East Midlands Ambulance Service reporting that they had been called to attend a deceased female. They had some concerns around the circumstances and the context that had been described to them by Tony Davis, who was also present. Now, bearing in mind, the account given by Davis was that she has fallen down the stairs. She was on the sofa when the ambulance crew first arrived. How did she get from the bottom of the stairs to there? How did the blood get to the various parts? Why is there broken glass in the kitchen? Why are there picture frames smashed? This very quickly turned into a crime scene rather than a simple death investigation.
While Inspector Fawcett Greaves begins a forensic investigation of the scene, Martin and Claire, well, they're 150 miles away and they have no idea what's happened. Tony calls Martin.
When he actually called me, the voice call had just gone midday, that kind of fell into what we thought, because he called me up on my mobile. He said, "Are you on your own? Are you driving?" So the questions he was asking me, I knew I was being set up for some bad news, but given the messages that we'd exchanged earlier on in the day, I thought the bad news was going to be something along the lines of, we've split up, I've kicked her out, or she's left, or something to that effect. So I knew I was being set up for bad news, because he asked me if I was alone and if I was driving. I said, well, I'm at home, Claire's here, but I'm in the room on my own. And then he said, Keely passed away this morning. To which I kind of went, what? And he said, she's died. And again, I kind of didn't, you hear it but don't hear it. And I said, what do you mean? And I remember him saying quite forcefully the third time, he said, she's dead. I was taken aback by what he was saying, but also in the way he said it. That conversation lasted only about 20-30 seconds. I said, well, how? She said, she's hurt herself badly. She's cut and she's bruised. And then he was very keen to end the conversation.
So we thought he'd told us that she'd hurt herself, so we thought she's really depressed and she's killed herself. Martin said, what's happening? Do we need to come up there? Where are the children? Oh, I'm sorting it. Everything, I'm sorting it. I'll let you know when I know more.
Claire and I started asking ourselves questions. We said, this isn't right. You don't get given that news in such a brief way, with no explanation, whether it be from him or from the police or ambulance or somebody we thought would give us more information than we've got.
I phoned Derbyshire Police to ask if something had happened, and they told me that yes, someone had died.
And so we started questioning. I then sent him a message. I think this was about 3:15 that day. A couple of messages, but my last message to him was, is there any chance that she didn't do this to herself? I've still got a text on my phone. He didn't answer. So I sent I said, Tony, is there any chance? And he didn't answer.
And it wasn't until a few hours later we found out he'd been arrested for her murder.
The interview with Keely's parents was terribly tough for them to do, but they insisted on talking to us. They wanted to tell this story. The investigation into the murder of Keely McGrath, that moves quickly. Police find that Keely had left the property the night before to visit the man that Tony believed she was having an affair with. During that time, Tony calls her over 60 times and sends messages demanding that she return home. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, she does return home, and it's then that she's brutally attacked by Tony. Pathologists later find that he used a belt and scissors to attack his partner, and that caused the breaking of 14 ribs, 2 collapsed lungs and a fractured skull. Police duly arrest Tony Davis.
We knew the day after that the police were sure. Obviously we know enough to know that there's a long way to go at that point, but there was no doubt in the police mind. I remember one of the police officers telling us for the first time that they suspect she was raped as part of the assault and murder. And I remember discussing with Claire afterwards how that strange feeling of hearing your daughter was probably raped, and yet that not being the worst thing you'd heard that day. So it was, I guess, just to further, we heard so much horrific detail. To hear that your daughter was raped, and for that not to be the worst thing you heard that day, kind of puts that in perspective.
I identified her. Martin couldn't do it. I had to. And people said, how can you do that? Do you think? I don't. It was awful. It's the worst thing I've ever done. But I had to, because I brought her into the world. I had to say goodbye. But I don't focus on that, because there's so many other funny things and pictures and videos that we do have that it doesn't take up my mind.
Did the police caution you before you went and identified her?
Yeah, because they said before that it was fine. She was fine. But then when we did go, they said she's not, and just to be aware. And I was petrified. I kept saying, I'm going to die. This is going to kill me. I'm not going to survive. And they were like, no, you'll be fine. And yeah, I'm glad I did it. Don't regret it at all.
While wrestling with the aftermath of their daughter's murder, Martin and Claire are forced to come to terms with the truth that behind closed doors, Keely had been experiencing horrific abuse. It's so often the case. Victims of abuse hide the truth of their lives. Forensic examination of Keely's phone reveals photographic evidence of not only violence, but also emotional and financial abuse. Tony Davis controlled every aspect of her life. He dictated what she wore, where she went, and who she was friends with. Police find those messages in which Keely talks of being prevented from sleeping as punishment. Just imagine that, he wasn't letting her sleep. She was being prevented from visiting her parents, from even leaving the house. She was a prisoner in her own home. During the trial, her parents are forced to listen to the details of what had happened to their daughter.
Did you always think it would go to trial?
We initially thought the police were very confident in their case right from the start. So we wondered whether he would plead guilty. Claire and I, amongst ourselves, wondered whether he might plead guilty, but the police told us subsequently afterwards, in fact, that he said very, very few people plead guilty to murder. They might plead guilty to something else, but they know that it's a life imprisonment and all that sort of stuff. So very few people plead guilty to murder, so they didn't expect him to. As time went on, the weeks and months went on towards the trial, we heard a little bit more of the prosecution case, which gave us a bit more of an insight into him as an individual. It became clear that he wasn't the type of person who was ever going to admit his guilt.
In July 2019, Anthony Davis pleads not guilty, and that forces Keely's family to sit through a jury trial in which they hear the gruesome, appalling, grotesque details of their daughter's abuse.
We knew that we were going to hear lots of information and detail that was uncomfortable. So we were prepared, or we prepared ourselves to a degree for that, but you can't prepare yourself for what you then hear. We know she was downstairs. There's lots and lots of forensic evidence, so we know that a large part of the attack happened in the bedroom, because there was blood and evidence all over the place in the bedroom, even up to the youngest child, who was 8 months old at the time. There was blood all at the side of her cot. She was in the room. All the children were in the house. She was in the room at the time when a lot of the attack happened. The level of her injuries mean there must have been a sustained attack on her, or attacks. It may have been more than one. And the degree of her injuries would have meant she was in severe pain, to the point where she would have been crying out until the point in which her lungs collapsed, and then she would have had trouble breathing, and you know, she would have. They don't know whether she died initially from the brain injuries or from the collapsed lungs, but both of them would have killed her. They just don't know which one came first.
Was he physically there?
Yeah, behind a screen, yeah. A glass screen.
Could he see you?
Yeah.
Did he seem ashamed?
No.
He was in the dock. We walked in, sat down, and I stared straight at him. He looked at me. I'm not entirely sure whether he nodded or whether he just looked at me, and I just continued staring at him. And after about 3 or 4 seconds, I guess, of eye contact, he looked away.
He seemed so much smaller. He wasn't the big I am that he thought he was. I don't know if he looked at us at any point. I did look at him some of the time, but I couldn't look at him most of the time. I think the only time he apparently showed any emotion was when I read out my victim impact statement, and I think he cried then, but all the way through he didn't show any emotion until he was on the witness stand. Then he blubbed.
When he was given evidence to the prosecution, QC, in one respect he was kind of turning on and off the tears and the sort of the trauma, if you like. But as soon as he was asked an awkward question, you would see him get on the defensive, and all of a sudden the snivelling and the trauma, the fake trauma, was replaced by arrogance or contempt.
During the trial, Tony Davis actually accuses Keely of being the abuser, abusive towards him. Prosecutors, they're able to use videos that he's actually recorded on his phone, and they prove that wasn't the case.
When we were in court, there were 3 videos played that he'd made on the weekend, the last weekend that we saw her. But the last one was quite menacing, where he pulled faces and said, "This isn't going to end well." That were his words, "This isn't going to end well." We also saw another video of, she was 30 in the June, and she went out with a friend just to the pub. She was back by 10:30, and he videoed her twice. She had a drink. I think he'd hit her, because I think she'd gone to hospital the next day. I think she thought she'd cracked a rib or something, because she was in pain. But I think he'd hit her before the videos, and he was making her say things. So she was sitting with her hands on her face, crying, and he was saying, "What is it you want to do with the children? What is it you want to do?" And she said, "I want to kill them, I want to kill them." But she was hysterical, and then she was lying on the sofa in another video, covering herself up, and he said, "Look at the state of you. You're disgusting. You're not a fit mother. You're this, you're that."
The jury, and of course Keely's parents, hear Tony forcing Keely to admit things on these videos.
So he was building a picture or trying to build a picture of her being the unfit mother.
As her mum, it must be utterly, learning that something's happened would be bad enough, but seeing her cowed like that and being humiliated.
Yeah. And that literally was, I think, just before she came to us. You know, a couple of weeks before she came to us. She never said a word.
So you ask yourself the question, why couldn't she tell us? We know through evidence that came out in the trial that he had goaded her by saying, your parents don't want you back, you can never go back and live with your parents, they don't want you, etc., etc. So she had probably been told that by him for years. So she probably believed it, and so she probably felt she had nowhere to escape to. Now, obviously, that wasn't the case. If we had any idea, then of course, you know, she had somewhere to go. But it's painful to know that she didn't feel able to talk to us. More painful to know that she probably believed that we didn't want her to come back because that's what she'd been told.
If only she'd said she could have moved down here, we've got room, she could have lived with us. It would have been hard, but what's the alternative? Living without her. I don't know whether he said to her, if you say something, I'll hurt you more, I'll hurt the children, I'll hurt them. Again, it's something we'll never find out. I really don't know.
On July 15th, 2019, Anthony Davis is given a life sentence for the murder of Keely McGrath. He'll serve a minimum of 24 years.
We've only learned about the coercive control side of things since Keely died, which is a massive thing, and in some ways worse than the physical side of it. But we wouldn't have thought of it, you know, at all. Well, we didn't see any signs. Now, looking back, even now, 3.5 years later, something will come up and go, do you think that's why? You know, it's an ongoing thing.
In the past, when you've known about, you know, domestic abuse, domestic homicide, things like this, you know, you'll see things on the news. I assume that you always thought there was something that would happen to other people.
Yeah. And you'd think, oh, that's sad, and, you know, let's go and have a cup of tea, you know, and forget about it. And it doesn't happen that often. You know, it's not that common. And now we see it all the time. Literally every day there's something. I don't want anyone else to go through the pain that we've gone through and still go through. And it's not something that will ever go away. That losing a child this way has to be one of the hardest things to go through. The day that she died was the day my life stopped. And it's not the same. It never will be. And it's a hard thing knowing that it's not going to get any better.
When we make these programmes, we are left quite literally in awe at the bravery of the people who've told the stories of their loved ones and how their lives have been taken. Keely's parents want everybody to know about the dangers of coercive control, and that's why they did this television programme, and that's why we are doing this podcast. It's only fitting, I'm sure everyone would agree, that the last thing we should do is hear about Keely.
When people ask you about Keely, what kind of a girl was she?
Keely had a good sense of humour when you could get it out of her. She was that kind of girl. She would give as good as she got, and we'd have a laugh and a giggle. I remember those times, I think.
She loved her family. She didn't show it in emotional ways. She bought the nicest presents. She thought the most thoughtful presents she bought. Sorry, Keely.
You've been listening to a true crime podcast from the team at FirstLook.